And the third area of technologies that I want to go into a little bit, or just kind of give a brief overview, is technologies that have to do with the human body. And so, what kind of things are being under development right now? And it's a really broad subject, and there's many different avenues and way that the research is fanning out regarding the human body. So, I'll just cover a few of them and just really broadly. So, first on the list was blockchain and cryptocurrency, which is a really big subject in and of itself. The next one is asteroid mining, which I think is a little ways out before you start seeing some real progress with that. Although I think Planetary Resources has some test flights slated for early 2020s. And then the third on the list that I want to go into a little bit has to do with technology and biotechnology related to the human body. So first, I'll start out with radical life extension. And one of the primary research centers or companies working on that is the SENS Institute under, and I think one of the main directors of that is Aubrey de Grey. So if you don't know who Aubrey de Grey is, he's a slender man. I believe he's British. I don't know exactly where from in Britain, but he has a really long beard, so you can't miss him. But I know the SENS Institute has been doing a lot of research on radical life extension and what allows people to live for extremely long periods of time. And As far as I know, the latest research is that there is definitely a lot of genetic components to it. There are things you can eat and things you can do in your life that will trigger certain genes to turn off and to turn on. Um, and the humans have a fair amount of control over how those genes in our body are expressed and how they're not expressed through diet, through stress mitigation, and through exercise, things like that. And there's even just habitual things, going to sleep at a certain time at night, waking up at the same time in the morning, getting good sleep, getting the right kind of exercise and movement, and keeping stress to a minimum with jobs and with relationships, and then eating healthy. And eating healthy, I think, is a whole different subject onto itself. And so I can go into that in another video on my thoughts on diet and nutrition, because I went pretty deep into diet and nutrition for a while, for about 6 or 7 years. I still read about it quite a bit, but that's definitely a subject of interest of mine as well. And so the thing that should be said about genetics is there are some genes that you have or people have, and they will cause disease at some point, really no matter what you do. And I believe that the latest evidence is that there's a fair amount we could do for many genes, but there's some that, say you have certain types of genes for, I don't know if Parkinson's is one, but there are some diseases that if you have the genes in your body, you will almost certainly get it at some point in your life. But those are just kind of few and far between. For many of the rest of them, if you have a higher predisposition toward cancer, there's a higher predisposition toward certain kinds of heart disease or circulation problems, or diabetes, things like that. Actually, I think diabetes, if it's type 1, that's another one that you typically just get. And usually you get it if you're young. I think it's around like adolescence or right before adolescence, you pretty much just get it. Whereas type 2, if you have a predisposition for type 2, I think it's fairly controllable through diet and through exercise and things like that. But the SENS Institute is really pioneering a lot of research into that. I know they've done a lot of research with like the telomere strands and how over time the telomere strands on the end of your the DNA snippets get shorter and shorter, and that affects how your cells replicate, and that affects how your cells maintain their health. And as they get shorter, you age, and you start to age quicker. And so there's certain things you can do to maintain the integrity of those telomere strands. I know that there's some different compounds that people have been looking at that induce like caloric restriction in your cells and your bodies, in your overall body, to prolong some life. And so you can do that somewhat with caloric restriction. There's also compounds like resveratrol that seem to have an effect like that as well, and certain antioxidants and things in like turmeric, especially turmeric mixed with black pepper and resveratrol seems to have some kind of synergistic effect. And then also just lowering sugar, and especially sugar, but just carbohydrates in general. I think some amount are okay, and it really depends on your own genetics, how much you can tolerate and what amounts are healthy for you and what amounts are not. I mean, somewhat like me, I'm fairly thin, or I'm pretty slender. I'm like at least 50% Scandinavian. I'm tall and slender, and so I seem to manage carbs fairly well. I can eat a lot of carbs. I just can't gain weight, and I don't know how it affects my blood sugar, but I seem to be doing all right. And so some of the research in that field is really interesting, and I think the goal is to create so-called bridges. And the idea behind bridges is if we develop therapies, we develop nutritional programs or medications to keep people alive for a long enough time to get to the next bridge of technologies in say 5 or 10 years that will prolong people's life even further and add maybe first you add 10 years onto their life expectancy, then you add, after 10 years from now you add another 10 years or 20 years, then 10 years from now you add another 30 years. And there's these bridges that keep building and compounding on each other over time, and eventually within a couple decades or so, people will be able to just maintain health, biological health, and mental health indefinitely. And I think that's a long-term goal of institutes like SENS and some of the other radical life extension technologies and in research that's going on. And I think that's ultimately where we're going. At some point, who knows when, maybe it'll be 30 years, 40 years from now, people will be able to live just indefinitely and maintain biological health. And they'll be able to have whatever age that they really want to live at. Maybe it's 25, maybe it's 35. Halting life or normal aging is a different question than reversing aging, but I think reversing aging will come after that at some point with like stem cell therapies and just regenerating your organs, regenerating your cells using techniques to trigger stem cells in your body. So it's possible we might even start reversing aging at some point, which I think is coming. I think it's coming. It's just a matter of time, and it's a matter of cost. And so then there's going to be a lot of moral questions that come out of that. Like, is this okay? Is this a normal thing for people to do? This goes very much against nature and what's happened with evolution for so long. Like, people are supposed to live, and you live a life and then you die. Well, if people are given the choice whether they just live indefinitely and they can maintain good health, and of course people are going to do it. And at first it's going to be the wealthier people that have access to these technologies, but just like any information technology, it'll go lower in cost and it'll become cheaper and cheaper over time, and it'll work better and better over time as it becomes cheaper. And eventually everyone will have access to this technology. And so then you run into other questions about overpopulation and stress on resources on the planet, things like that. What do we do next? So that's all really cool. Another part of that, somewhat related, is a project called the Blue Brain Project in Switzerland. And there's basically a team in Switzerland of neuroscientists and researchers that are trying to reverse engineer the human brain. And this is a really interesting thing. I was reading about this a while ago, and I think one of the first things they did was they completely reverse engineered a rat neocortex. So it's a section of its brain, and they basically turned every single cell of that rat neocortex into computer code. And then they had like a silicon imagery of 3D model image of this rat neocortex. So who knows where that's all going to go. I mean, that's conjures up questions of what do you do with that information? If we reverse engineer a human brain and we have it in a bunch of supercomputers, will it become conscious? I don't know. I don't think it will be in the normal sense, but at the very least, it'll be able to do computations order of magnitudes faster and more reliably than human brains could, because there's a trade-off between digital code and human consciousness, right? So digital code, it's able to process narrow fields of problems really quickly, whereas humans have like pattern recognition down really well. And there's a lot of other things we can do that computers can't. But where do we all go with that? What do we go with that information? And do we start downloading these reversed engineered brains on machines or some kind of robots, and they can start doing tasks that humans would never be able to do? So I don't know if you start having robotic construction workers doing like really high risk jobs, and they start causing a mass dislocation or disruption of the American workforce for a lot of jobs that are super labor intensive and dangerous. So that's a possibility. Who knows? I mean, who knows where this is going to go? But it's coming. It's coming. They will reverse engineer a human brain. I think it's slated for the early 2020s. And it could happen a little after that, but it'll probably be around there. And so that's really fascinating. And I don't know where we all go from that. And then, um, and then there's a nanotechnology aspect of, um, which I think will integrate or work with somehow with stem cell therapies and things like that. But that's really a big question, a big field as well. Nanotechnology is a really broad field. And there's a lot of different applications for it. But when it comes to the human body, of course, we're talking about um, cellular repair on the nanoscale. So using like really small nanobots to go inside our body and repair cells and repair organs from the inside out, so you don't have to do any invasive therapies. And there's also even talk about artificial red blood cells called respirocytes. And I don't know where they are with the development of this. I know it's a theoretical idea that's possible. But basically, the idea behind respirocytes is um, they are 10 times or 100 times more efficient than normal red blood cells. And so if you have a certain amount of those circulating through your body and doing the same thing as a red blood cell does, but it does it 100 times better, then theoretically you'd be able to run, a mile or so and you only take 2 breaths. Or maybe you can go underneath and sit at the bottom of a pool, in a swimming pool, for 20 minutes and not take a breath and just hold your breath, and you're fine because you have all the oxygen you need because these respirocytes are super efficient. So that stuff's really cool, and that's really interesting as well. And there's going to be many, many, many applications for technologies on the nanoscale once they perfect some of those and as the research becomes more borne out. Some of the other things that are going on with technology related to the human body. Oh, I should say real quick, just a little plug. So one of the websites I was looking at is called NanoWork, work as in WERK, and it's a really interesting resource for different companies and careers and research going on in the nanotechnology world. So if you're interested in learning more about that stuff, I'll put a link in the comment section, and so you can look at that in your own free time. What else? So another one that I think is a really interesting area is VR stuff. And VR is not necessarily directly related to our biology or biotechnology, but it is something that will overlay with our normal field of vision, our normal human experience. So it's also another big field. There's a lot of ways to go with that. But I would just say in general, there's some interesting companies that are working with advanced AR right now. A couple of them, Value Coders, We AR, Geekwork, Virtuosity, Vertalis, BIV, Rost, Ion Reality, App Real VR, Vert Spaces, VR Premium, Xenium Digital. And so there's a lot of different ways to go with the virtual reality route. So, there's augmented reality, there's virtual reality, there's kind of different ways to do it. So virtual reality is my understanding is full immersion in a virtual environment. And you might see that a lot more with like games, and you're starting to see it now, and there's some games that can do that. I know one of the issues with virtual reality goggles is you don't actually have, the image doesn't necessarily track your eye movement. It only tracks your head movement. So if you move your head side to side like that, you'll have your field of view move with you. But if you move your eyes left to right, you're still looking at the same image on the screen. And I know there's some virtual reality companies that are more advanced that track your eye movement too. So you move your head, you see something different. You move your eyes to the left, you see something different. And it becomes more video realistic or photorealistic as what you would experience in real life. So that's really cool. And one of the other parts of that puzzle is how do you create an experience or a tactile experience that feels like you're actually there. And I know there's a couple of companies that have been working on that, basically where they have these stands that have a belt around them, and they can turn 360 degrees, and they secure your waist in place. And then on your feet, you're basically running in this curved bowl, and you have these slippery socks on them, or you have like a little treadmill that can rotate, something like that. And so you're wearing 3D goggles, virtual reality goggles, and then you're running around in this environment, and you're moving your body, but you're actually not moving anywhere. So you're getting exercise and you're moving, and it feels like tactilely or physically like you're in this virtual space and you're interacting with it. but you're not actually going anywhere. So that stuff's really cool, and I think it has a little bit of ways to go.